So, the Canadian election will be over in a few days. Does that surprise you? When Prime Minister Carney used his powers as Prime Minister to reschedule this year's election 6 months early, it was assumed he was seeking to capitalize on the good poll numbers his party had been experiencing lately. It was in his interest to close the deal quickly, and so we are now wrapping up what has been a very condensed election campaign of just 5 weeks. Now, legally speaking, most Canadian election campaigns are relatively short, but the legal campaign period is different from the informal election campaign period that lasts much longer. I mean, you could easily argue that the moment all of the main parties get their candidates for Prime Minister in place, the election campaign has basically kicked off. For the 2021 Canadian election, for instance, the Conservative Party picked their guy to run against Trudeau a year in advance of the formal election kickoff. In anticipation of this year's race against Trudeau, the Conservative Party picked their new leader, Pierre Poilievre, way back in September of 2022, and he has been campaigning nonstop ever since, running election-style ads and all the rest of it. What makes this campaign feel uniquely short by Canadian standards, however, is the fact that Prime Minister Trudeau abruptly abandoned his bid for a 4th term in January after having spent years claiming to want one. So Mark Carney was installed to run in his place, and then Carney decided that the election should be 6 months early. And in that sense, I don't think there has ever been a campaign quite this rushed in modern Canadian history, in the sense that the two main candidates have only been in place for little over a month. I know we have all sorts of cliches about how a week is a long time in politics and all of that, but that's only really true if the week in question contains big, dramatic events. But if it doesn't, then sometimes a week in politics is just a week. So it really shouldn't be all that surprising that the last 5 weeks of this election campaign have not really altered this country's pre-existing political mood all that much. I mean, I think that most people would say that the biggest dramatics of this election happened well before the election campaign formally began, which again suggests that there are dangers in defining the campaign period too narrowly. Trump's re-election, Trudeau's resignation, Carney's installation, and Trump's imposition of tariffs on Canada are 4 huge events that have massively shaken up Canadian politics over the last 5 months. Compared to the impact of those things, it was probably unrealistic to expect anything of comparable consequence to happen in the last 36 days. To a large extent, the cosmic roulette wheel deciding what this election would be about was already spun. Okay, so now in terms of the campaign itself, what has been interesting to observe is just the degree that Prime Minister Carney and Pierre Poilievre don't seem all that interested in each other. Pierre has been offering himself as a way to reject the legacy of Justin Trudeau and has been running a pretty cautious and conventional campaign in which he rolls out a relatively mild and moderate policy promise every day or two.
Can we afford a 4th Liberal term of rising costs and crime and a weakened economy? Or is it time for a change with a new Conservative government?
Carney, meanwhile, has mostly ignored Pierre and has been campaigning against Trump and the American aggression that he represents, flying around the country, meeting with allies, and doing his best to look like a serious statesman preparing for the challenges ahead.
What do the Americans want? They want our strength. They want our resources. They want our water. They want our land. They want our country.
The minor parties and their static leaders remain uninteresting to most voters and don't seem to have a clear sense of what they exist to do anymore. It is possible they will face a wipeout. In other words, the campaign has basically been a 2-man race between 2 discrete parties embodying 2 factions of a polarized nation. Pierre has been very successful in unifying pretty much all right-of-center Canadians behind him, including a lot of younger people who didn't previously realize they were conservatives or pay much attention to politics. But Prime Minister Carney has similarly been extremely successful in uniting all left-of-center Canadians behind him in a way that even Justin Trudeau, for all of his progressive bona fides, never could. Carney has really helped kill off the NDP, it looks like. A lot of the forces driving Canadian polarization are tied to things like age and gender and region. and I'll talk more about all of that in my post-election video. But for now, it's worth noting that Canada is a country like many others these days where people have pretty hardwired understandings of what voting left or right means as a kind of broad expression of their personal cultural identity. And in that sense, Canadians seem pretty immune to even the savviest marketing campaigns designed to alleviate anxieties or stereotypes about the parties. Now, that said, there has been some movement in the polls over the last few weeks. Carney entered this race with a solid lead, but it is very slowly melting away a little bit, day by day. Conservatives are really clinging to these headlines like a life raft, hoping that if present trends continue and the polls get within the margin of error, they might still have a chance to eke out a narrow last-minute win, which in turn reinforces a line that I've heard some people say about this campaign, which is that while Pierre is running against the Liberals, Carney is running against the clock. So we will see, I suppose. This is the fourth election that I have covered on this channel since I started it almost exactly 10 years ago. The first two, I feel, had interesting beginnings, middles, and ends, while the 2021 one was interesting at the start and middle, but ended boringly. This one feels like it had a dramatic start and a boring middle. I suppose we will see what sort of end it has in a couple of days.